I've never been in a prison before, let alone an African women's prison. And Francine's like, I want you to go and paint a mural in the prison.
This is the Bold Artist Podcast.
You have answers and you're expressing them in your art. Your art is important and it needs to be seen.
Welcome, and let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to the Bold Artist Podcast. Today I'm here with Charla Maarschalk, and we're having a continuation of the talk we had in last week's episode. And I want to encourage you, if you haven't already listened or watched last week's episode, it's going to be important for you to understand this week, because we're going to dive a little bit deeper into Charla's personal story of how impactful her trip to Kenya was, how it left a mark on her life and her art, and has since then been a ripple effect through her starting Bold School and founding her online painting classes. And so last week's episode really, it laid the foundation, didn't it, Charla? Our listeners and watchers are going to have to know the heart and what you were doing in Africa through last week's episode to really get the full scope of today's show.
Yeah. Today I'm going to tell the story from a little bit of a different angle and a story I have never told before. I really have never, I've only talked about this with my closest friends and family members. It's a hard thing for me to talk about on a few different levels because it was one of the most impactful moments of my entire life. It's a moment that's filled with God and my relationship and who he is and what he means to me. And so I find that a very vulnerable thing to discuss on a podcast. And I usually cry. So
okay, you got the Kleenex ready?
This is
Everybody get the Kleenex out. Charla's going to cry. We're all going to cry with her.
I can feel it.
But first of all, I could feel at the end of last week's episode, I could sense it going there because we began to talk about what really pierced your heart in Africa.
Yeah.
And I thanked you at the end of last week's episode. I thanked you for being vulnerable enough to share and let Africa pierce your heart to then have the ripple effect it's having today through the Bold School community. And that's just one part of how it's had a ripple effect. There's so much more, but I could feel us getting to that point where I'm like, where is that tissue box?
Well, one thing I learned in Kenya was how to talk through crying or how to actually just not cry at all. I learned that because every time I tried to talk to people, well, in front of a group of people, I would cry. I was like a wreck there for a little while because of this experience that I had, which was in a prison, by the way, the prison experience, I'd like to call it. So
that's all I know so far, just to let everyone know. All I know is that today we're talking about the prison. And so Charla, first, I am going to trust that everyone's listened to last week's episode. So they know the setting is in Kenya. And so now paint the picture for us again. What part of Kenya are we in and what is this prison?
Yeah, so I went to Kenya. We went to a town called Kitale, which is about an 8-hour drive from Nairobi. I don't know the kilometers. I always tell my distances by hours of driving. Now these are on bad roads, so it's slow driving. But it's almost on the other side of Kenya from Nairobi. It's inland. So we were in Kitale for almost 3 weeks. And the people that we went with, who are called Larry and Francine. They're Canadians who'd been living in Kenya for about 10 years, working with kids there, set up a medical clinic there. I went to Kenya with my friend who was a doctor for the work that she was wanting to do, just personal work that she wanted to do there. I had been to Africa before. My husband's from Zimbabwe, so Africa itself was not new to me. And I had done missions trips when I was younger, so that was also not a new experience for me. And I've traveled lots. But what happened while I was in Kitale was something I've never experienced before. And I think it was just a pivotal moment in my life in that time and in my, I'll say career. Career sounds so like like sterile, but my career and my work and my art are who I make up a big part of who I am and everything that I do. So it was a big part of that part of me, a big moment for that part of me. So that began back, we went to Kenya in the end of January in 2019. So that fall, Larry and Francine were back in Canada, where they usually come back once a year to fundraise and to just come home and have a break from the work that they do, because it's 24/7 what they do. So they were here, and I met them for the first time at Alana's house, which was a really good idea because we were going to go work with them for 3 weeks. So it was a good idea to meet them. So we went over there to meet and ask questions and talk about the trip. And I was like, well, I'm just going to bring my camera and hang out for 3 weeks. Is that okay? And Francine's like, yeah, I'm so excited. And she's got this really beautiful French accent. And she's like, Charla, I'm so excited to meet you. So Francine is an artist, and she's a photographer, and she loves to paint. So that was amazing. And I just love her on a deeper level because of it, now that I know her well. But in that moment, I was like, oh, crap. Like, I was going to be the big photographer. I was going to come and take all these beautiful photos so you could like use them in your fundraising efforts or something. And now I find out they already have, like, she's not just says she's a photographer. She's a good photographer. Wow. She has amazing photographs of work that they have done over the years. And she has these beautiful portraits in her house that she paints. And I suddenly felt even more obsolete. And this is just at the moment. I'm like, I'm going to trudge forward and I'm going to go anyways. And then Larry and Francine are like, Charla, as soon as we heard you were coming, we knew exactly what we wanted you to do. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what? And they're like, we have a prison ministry where we go in and we hang out with, Francine goes in the women's prison, Larry and the other guys, the local guys that they work with, David and Gideon, go to the male prison, and they just teach them. They, like, Francine has done art workshops in the prisons, and they do things like she held a fashion show for the ladies in the prison. Wow. There's so much story behind the prison itself. You know, the people that are there in prison, especially in the women's prison, are not necessarily there because they did something wrong. They're often there because they're a woman. And somebody, like their husband, didn't like them anymore, and they had to do something like steal, or maybe they stole food, or they were caught in adultery, which was a reason to go to prison, or there were women there who murdered their husbands, and the reasons they did that were because their husbands were beating them daily, and they were just defending themselves and ended up killing their husband. Like, there are people who have committed crimes as well, but the women are there because they've lived hard lives and they don't know what to do to help themselves. So Larry and Francine go in to educate, to teach, to support. This prison was very interesting because a lot of women there are pregnant. Many of them are not pregnant when they go in, so you can imagine how they get pregnant. It's a women's prison. They get pregnant by the guards, and they're pretty much, I think the story went, well, I probably shouldn't go into too many details about that. But anyways, many of the women were pregnant, and they are giving birth in prison. So they're allowed to keep their children there until they're 4 years old or 5 years old. And so there's children in the prison running around everywhere. So the women need support for becoming moms while they're in prison. And they also often have to say goodbye to their kids because the kids have to leave when they're 4 or 5 years old, and the moms are sometimes still there. Then there's the aftermath of prison. When they leave, they could possibly excommunicated from their families and their communities. So they have to figure out how to survive when they get out of prison. So there's so much support needed. These ladies are also wearing like it looks like just a robe, and they have no undergarments, and the robes are often like these striped dresses are often like falling apart at the seams, and they're ripped. And so something that Francine does in the ministry is bring them underwear, which is a huge deal for them to have underwear to wear. Wow. So, you know, these are the types of things that are happening there. So I've never been in a prison before, let alone an African women's prison. And Francine's like, I want you to go and paint a mural in the prison, in the women's prison. And I was like, do what? Like, paint a mural in a prison? I don't paint murals, and I don't go into prisons. So I just...
And did you know this before you even went to Africa that you would be doing
so this was at the meeting with them in the fall where I realized that Francine was already a photographer and an artist. What did they need me for? And she's like,
they had some plans for you.
she said, last week, I literally prayed that somebody would come and paint a mural. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it.
Wow.
And the interesting thing was, for the last few years before that, I was painting backdrops at my kids' school for their drama production, which was a pretty big production. And I was painting backdrops for them, which was a giant thorn in my side because it was not fun. It was long nights of doing these. So I had actually created processes to speed this up, and so I could have a team and I could have people come in who weren't even artists to help me and get these backdrops finished. So I was like, all of these things I've learned in painting backdrops, I'm going to take into this prison. And I had 2 of the other girls from our team said that they would come to the prison with me. So there's 3 of us, and we would paint this mural together. So that became the one goal that I had while in Kenya. The one thing I was going to do, it was my project, and I had to make happen. So I designed the mural. They sent me photos and sizes of what I was going to paint on this giant like storage container almost. It was a really giant thing. It was like a storage container. And I would have that surface to paint on. And I would be able to hopefully get paint. Hopefully.
Right. That'd be an important part of this process.
Yeah. So we would have to get paint, but it would be limited, and I probably wouldn't have many colors. So I decided I would need to be able to paint it with just basic 3 primary colors. And if you've ever painted before, you know that not every blue is created alike. So I was going to be able to work with what I had. Right. So I had to create it with that in mind. And so I created a portrait. I had created a mural with portraits of mothers and children. And in Africa, there's a tribe there, and not all tribes are the same. Their traditions and cultures are different, and they're often warring with each other. But there is one tribe that wears, you've probably seen them, like beaded necklaces around their neck, and they often like have long stretched out necks because they add these beads and layers of beads. And I think several cultures wear the beads, but the beads tell stories of their tribe and their family. So these aren't the exact stories, but just as an example, if you get married, you put on a certain colors of beads around your neck. And then when you have children, you have more. And so your beads tell your story in your community and probably give you status. So they're important. So, and I love Francine had all these incredible photos of all these different tribes that they had worked with. And she had these women with all these beads around their neck. And I'm like, I love that idea that these beads tell a story of your family. And these women, as a woman and a mother, I'm thinking, even though they're in prison and there's a whole lot of stuff going on around them, they've got children. And what's your number one priority in life when you're a mom? It's your child. So if I was in their place, I thought my number one thought would be, how do I raise a child in prison? How do I let him go out without me in this world, this crazy world that I can't really trust? What is, that would be my number one concern, is how do I raise my child and how do I protect him when he's leaving and I'm still here? Wow. So I created the mural of these women with the stories around their neck, and then these beads kind of came off of their neck, like trailed up into the sky and became flowers. And these little kids were actually kind of reaching up to grab these flowers and these beads. And the idea was that the seeds, like they were seeds turning into flowers, and the children were getting the flowers. So the idea was that beautiful. The seeds that the mother plants into the soul and the spirit of her child when he's young will go with them wherever they go, no matter if mom is there or not. And that's true for us here. I have a 17-year-old that's graduating, and Mary Janelle, you have graduated children. And like, you're in the world, and I'm hoping that I was able to plant some good seeds so that you can use them in the time that you need them. So I felt like that was a pretty basic message, you know, it was a normal message for a mom. But I wanted to encourage them that I understood that they're not alone. You know, there's more people, the whole world understands. So I do this. And I'm like, okay, that's a good idea, you know, and I got it all figured out. And then the day comes, and this is where everything's changed for me.
So far up until this point, you have designed this mural. It's in your heart and head, probably sketched, and you're hoping to get the paint. So,
and we get there and we get the paint, and we get the brushes. Okay. We got everything that we needed. I mean, they were very basic supplies. What I had expected, but I had designed it so that I could work with that. And I had 2 ladies coming with me. So
who were painters, or they were just going to take direction from you?
They were just taking direction from me.
Okay.
And so we're headed out to the prison, and it's Francine and me and the other 2 girls. And it was Maureen and Julie. And I was like, so
which
Francine...
I found out I know Maureen, by the way. I didn't know that until the
other
really?
Night. Oh,
yeah. I'll just throw that in there. Hi, Maureen.
So we're driving to the prison, and I could like feel the weight. I'm going to try and be really vulnerable and really just tell everything that I was feeling. And I could like feel the weight of it. I didn't even realize what the weight was. But we're driving, and we cross we cross the barrier to the prison. And Francine's like, okay, guys, you need to realize this is a prison. Like, these guards are serious. Like, there's a lot you can't do in here. There's a lot you can't say. Just the fact that this white woman is allowed to cross into here and have authority in this prison, which they've granted to her because of the work that she had done there and the impact that she had, they've granted this to her. She's like, we cannot take this for granted. Like, we have to respect it because they can take this away at like a glance. So like, oh my goodness, like I could wreck this if I do this wrong, if I do something wrong. So we're terrified, you know, like we're getting in there and we're terrified. So we cross in and we go, and we cross through one gate, but we're still not in the actual prison. And then we go to the prison head person, whatever they're called. What is the prison? It's the same name there as it is in every movie. I forget what they're called. This lady, the highest authority of the prison.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank too.
Totally drawing a blank. So we meet her, and she's like, well, you know, I don't know. Maybe you'll get in, maybe you won't. And we're like, okay. So she leaves us there, and we're just standing at the gate. And Francine's like, oh, like we need to get in. Like we're on a tight schedule because we're going to Pukot. We hadn't gone yet. And she's like, we have 3 days to get this done. And we're like, okay, well, maybe it's not going to work out. And I'm like, whatever. Like, maybe it's not going to work out. I'm good with leaving. and then I'm like, and Francine, you're not going to leave us here, right? Like, you're not just going to leave us at the prison. You're staying. And she's like, oh, yeah, I'll be here. So we're waiting. And all of a sudden we hear drums playing, all these drums playing. And I'm like, oh my goodness, they're playing drums, and we're outside the prison walls. We're missing this amazing, like all these women are in there playing drums and singing, and we're missing it. And then all of a sudden they open up the gate, and they're like, come in. And what had happened was they went in and they gathered all the women together in like the yard, and they brought out their drums, and they wanted to greet us in song. And
wow.
This
is not what I was expecting.
Me neither. And I'm trying to stay in my head right now, because as soon as I try to enter into the emotion of that moment, this is where I lost it. So we walk into the prison. And like, this is the reason I'm there, is to paint this mural. And I was like, okay, just let me in the prison so I can paint the mural. And we get greeted by every prisoner, every woman that was being held as a prisoner there, singing. And they weren't just singing a song, they were singing like Amazing Grace. Like, it's... Yeah, I can feel myself. I'm going.
Yeah, and funny enough, we were talking about having Kleenex nearby, and I don't have nearby,
so okay. So we're walking in, and I'm realizing these women are like worshiping God. You know, like these are not just it was an African language, but I could understand the melody. And so we walk in and they just want to meet us. And every single one of them wanted to greet us. They wanted to shake our hand and hug us, every single woman. So all like there were the four of us. And as we went down the line and physically greeted every single woman, all of us just started to cry. Like our heart just over poured with, it was just love. Like, I don't even know how to explain it. But the fact that these women were, I mean, living and what I would think would be one of the worst lives to live, imprisoned in Africa, in a prison in Africa. They were in bare feet. Their clothes are falling off of them. They had babies on their hips and they're in prison, and they were greeting us with smiles and love and songs. And it was amazing. So the emotion of that was great. And I was just bawling my eyes out, tears just rolling down my cheeks. I didn't even know I was crying. It was just happening. It was just a response. And so they all sat down, and the prison guard came up and spoke and introduced us and we had a translator. So speaking through a translator is also very difficult. And then Francine gets up and introduces me. And she's like, and Charla is going to explain what she's here to do. And I'm like, I'm going to what? I'm still bawling my eyes out. I cannot compose myself. And she's like, welcome Charla to the stand to speak. I'm like, I can't speak. So I have to get up and now tell them what I'm going to do. And I'm seeing for the first time where I'm going to paint. And it's like the whole prison yard is here. And there's a big building over here where I never went in it. But this is where I think they go to eat and stuff. And then on the other side, so there's a big a water container in the middle where they get their drinking water from. And on the other side is this big wall where I'm going to paint. And basically it's just the prison yard and this painting wall where I'm going to stand for 3 days and paint with these women watching me. And so I'm explaining to them what I'm going to paint, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to be here with you guys for a couple of days. And
is someone translating what you're saying?
Yeah, and they're translating. And I want them to know the heart that I've come with, like that this was for them. And I have pictures of it, and I want to explain what it means so that they can understand the message, and hopefully it will be beautiful and impact them. And as I'm telling the story, they start to cry. And again, I'm controlling myself here a lot. This is hard for me to tell and stay able to speak. So I'm like shaking. So they start crying and they're overwhelmed with emotion and they want to hug me again. And they want to say like how grateful they are. So I think some of them did speak and was translated to me about how excited they were and how grateful they were. So that happened, and I finished my story. I got it all out, and we greeted and hugged again, and I think we did a few other things, and then we left for the day. And I was still crying, and as we walked out of the prison, I cried and I cried. I got in the car, drove back to the house. I cried the whole way in the car. I went in my room and I sat on my bed and I cried for hours, like hours. And so Alana comes in and she's like, Charla, you need to write down what you're feeling because something is transforming in you right now. And I'm like, I don't know what it is. I just need this all to come out. So I start writing, and I just started to realize, and this is what I referred to in the last, you referred to actually, Mary Janelle, in the last podcast. I just had this heart-piercing moment. And it wasn't meeting these kids on the street that just stole my heart, these little boys that were living on the street, or the Pocot kids, or the amazing families that were taking kids off the street, and they had like 12 street kids living in their little houses and they're providing for them. Those things were incredible and eye-opening and life-changing. But when I drove away from the prison that first day, I realized that here I was, an artist. I have to say this with great composure. An artist who, so me included, and many people that I've met before and since then, who say our work is not important. Our work is for me in my studio alone, and I'm not going to show the world. I'm not going to share it. I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm not even going to paint because I don't even feel like I'm worthy enough to even paint because it's a useless thing to do. Here I was, one of those artists on the other side of the world. I was taken to the other side of the world so that I could carry a message to these women who some would call the outcasts or the lowest caste of society and deem unimportant and unworthy of anything. Here they were, and I had traveled across the world as a messenger to bring them a message of love through art. Compose myself again, like through art. It wasn't money. It wasn't here's $1,000 to go buy a new hut for you and your child, or get some underwear or some clothes or food to eat. It was art, and it was impacting them. They were so grateful and so thankful, and they hadn't even seen it yet. They didn't even know me or what I could accomplish, what I could do. But it was impacting them. And I mean, and when it was done, which I did finish it, they had a piece of colorful art that reminded them every day who they are and the power that they get to carry into their children's hearts. You know, that was the message. And it wasn't from me. This wasn't me. I was a messenger. This is why I say this was an experience with my faith and my trust in my God and my creator and my savior, because he I don't want to cry on my podcast. I don't want to cry if I don't cry in front of anybody. Okay. That he loves them so much that he needed a person to be willing to go there and suffer in that heat and be terrified and scared and all the rest of it. But he needed somebody to go there and give them this message that they are loved and they're cared for and they're watched over and their lives matter. And not just their lives, but their lives of their children that were born in prison and quite possibly out of rape. Those children mattered and their lives mattered. And that was what I was there for. And it was so overwhelming. I couldn't not just, I had to cry to let all that out because I wouldn't have been able to accomplish the feat that I was there to do. And it was just a moment. What I wrote in my journal when I read it back, because I can't really even remember all that came out of me that day, was the importance of the work that we do as artists, you know, and this is the message I preach. If you've been in my school or heard me talk at all, it's the message I preach, is that you have a unique message to give to the world, and you have the power to impact people's lives and change them.
And I don't actually say that right in the intro of the podcast.
Yeah.
It's right in the intro. You're saying
do.
Your voice matters.
Yeah.
You matter. Your art matters. The world needs to see it and hear your voice.
And I say it because I experienced it in that moment. And it wasn't about me. It was like something was moving and flowing through me. It couldn't have happened if I was unwilling to use my hands to paint it. If I was unwilling to get on that plane. When I bought the ticket to go there, I didn't have any money. Like, we were just scraping money together so that I could go. Like, none of that was easy for me or our family at the time. And I could have easily said no at so many places, and I did not know that moment was going to have the impact on me like it did, or on the people there like it did. And it was something that I did, and I left there. And I've thought a lot over the last few years about even sharing that message, because I didn't want to share it and for it to be like become unimportant or like go viral or be something that people think that I'm trying to make money off of. Like, it's something so deep, so powerful, so special. I only want to tell the story so that people can hear it, so that they can do that, and they can know that they can do what I did, in the sense of knowing how important their work is. It's not about making money or starting a business or being famous or doing good work or feeling good about yourself because you did something good. You went to Kenya and helped some orphans. Like, it's not that. It's that your work is powerful here. There's people here. There's people on your street that need to hear it, in your town, in your city. You don't necessarily have to go across the world. For me, it was that I was taken from one country to the next, in a place that I couldn't even speak to the people. And I was able to give a visual message to them that would impact them, and is still impacting people there now that never met the team that painted it. But there's people coming in and it's still being impacted in their lives.
And I feel like the tears and that deep release of emotion was you coming face to face with purpose, like spiritual purpose, not just purpose with your talent. We can be purposeful all day to paint and, you know, render images, but deep spiritual purpose, where you were knowing, I'm on the face of the earth right now for this moment, for these people, for this painting. And, you know, you'd think that you'd hear from an artist, oh, one of my most impactful, I'm making something up right now, but my most impactful moment is when I hung in this prestigious gallery and this famous person complimented my work, which is great. Those are highlights of careers. But what you've described here goes beyond all of that superficial career highlight, monetary value kind of work. It goes way beyond to a deep spiritual meaning, that I'm here for this moment in time with this spiritual purpose, using my artwork, using the gifts I was given to create with. And that I can see, I can see and understand. I feel like the impact that it had on you.
Yeah. I feel like I'll never have a moment like that again. Like that moment, I think the way I described it at the end of the night when Alana came back in, she's like, are you ready to talk about what's just happened? I was like, I don't know if I could talk yet, but I said, I felt like, and I already have a deep connection with God and who he is. And I feel like I know him deeply. I know him well. And I said, at this moment, I feel like this is the surface of who God is, who he's created me to be, and his love for me. And I'm just right here. That's what I learned today. I realized that, or maybe I'm just under the surface. I'm like, I realized that I just learned a lot more than I ever thought I was going to learn in my lifetime. And I realized there's so much more. That this was just the surface of what is actually happening in our lives and relationships if we're willing to trust and move forward. And I know not everybody here believes in the spiritual world, let alone a God who created us. But I do. So I'm just speaking very openly about what it all meant to me in that moment. And I just recognize that I've read the Bible, I've prayed, I've had many moments where I've listened to God or listened for him. And I thought I knew him well, which maybe I did. But that day I realized the depth of love and sacrifice that I would probably never understand. I'll never get very far in that. Yeah. I think that moment was a moment that it might be a once in a lifetime moment of recognizing how deep purpose and meaning, and I don't know. It's so hard to even put into words. That's why I just cried for hours. And I just want to say, I don't cry. Like, I am not a crier. All of my friends are like, Charlotte, do you even have tears in your eyes? I don't cry. Only maybe.
Yeah, so this was the floodgate opening. Floodgate.
Yeah, it's what was so shocking about it. And I think my friends were like, I don't know what to do with you right now. You're crying.
Yeah. So if there's an artist listening, and I do know that there's a lot of artists who have faithfully listened or watched all the podcasts, and they've grown in this journey with us, Charla. They've heard so much of what you've had to share, because it's quite often that it's you and I on a podcast. And now we're here at today's episode where they hear this deep spiritual journey, and their hearts are just as open and aching and pierced as yours was that day as they're listening to this story, which I can imagine a lot of hearts are going to be just really touched from hearing your moment of heart piercing in Africa. What would you like to share with that artist today? Maybe they'll never go there, to that soil or to that place in the same kind of story, but what would you say to them in their life and in their world as they're feeling with you today?
Well, I think like that story feels big because I went across the world and I was in a women's prison, and you know, it was a big thing, but that was just a couple of hours. We weren't even there an hour that day of my life. You know, that's not what's needed for something, for you to step into these things and step into your purpose or whatever you want to call it. I think that began with those first steps, which I talked about in the last podcast, of should I go to Kenya? Do I even have a place there? Like, or am I just going to waste everybody's time and effort? I'm going to take up a seat in the car, you know, like, am I just going to be a waste of space? Really? Like, you have these thoughts about, am I important enough to go? Should I go? Is this something that's meaningful? But I had to trust that there was purpose and there was a place for me. And it's not me, Charla Maarschalk. It's every single human in the earth has a place somewhere. And you have to trust that this next step that you're being directed into is going to be purposeful. You have to just do it. Sometimes we make a mistake and we go in the wrong direction, but you can only learn from that to go to the next place. So it's not about a big step in going to Africa or helping the homeless downtown. It's not about giving of yourself to places of need. Like, it's not about that at all. It's why it feels a little cliche that it happened in Africa for me. It's not about those cliche moments. It's just about trusting that your work has a unique purpose and you need to just take the next step into it. That was an hour in my life. When I came home from Kenya, nobody knew what I had experienced, and I tried to tell them, and they didn't get it. Like,
words aren't enough to describe.
Yeah, they're like, okay, cool, you had a deep experience in Africa. Well, isn't that what happens when you go to Africa? I don't know, I've never been there. Like, you know, like that was the response. Or people were like, cool, that's amazing, can I see the pictures? You know, they love me and they're trying to connect. So what are you going to do with that for the rest of your life? When I came back, I had to figure out, what am I going to do with that? This isn't for my friend like Mary Janelle to even necessarily take something from. It's, what am I going to do now? Like, I've experienced something. Now it's up to me to take that and do something with it. So then I had to take the next step forward. And so I'm trying to say to anyone that's listening that feels impacted and feels like there's something resonating in your spirit, you just have to take the next step forward. It might seem cliche, or it might seem like there's no power in it, there's no use in it. I actually thought I was creating an online class so that I could have some income so I could go back to Kenya, and then COVID happened and the world locked down. You know, like, so I did it. So I was like, well, what am I doing this for? Then I started realizing, actually, I'm sending this message to other people and they're being impacted. And I was shocked by that. I didn't even realize that's what I was doing. And then I started seeing what that step had actually opened up. And now we're doing a podcast, and I'm telling this story to the world, or to the people listening anyways, which I thought I would never do. So I don't know what this is going to open up. So you just have to trust that next step. Go with your gut on it. If you're the praying kind, pray and trust that you're being led in the right path, even though it doesn't feel easy or it doesn't make sense and you can't see the outcome and you can't see what its purpose is. Like, just do it. Just go forward. And I'm not the first person to preach this message by any means, but
well, and I'm thinking how you mentioned in the beginning of that this impactful moment happened for you in such a big way, like a trip to Africa, and in such an extreme way, which is amazing. But there, for many of us listening, it could happen in simply going and painting your next painting, simply going to, thinking of outreach, just going to your local soup kitchen, or, like whatever. It might not be in terms of outreach or mission type of work. It could be in just waving to that neighbor who feels lonely. Like it's one thing I've learned here at the Bold Artist podcast from interviewing all the different artists and asking them, what is your bold, brave move that you've made as an artist? A lot will have a big story, but most have small, brave steps that they've taken that amount to bigger things. And so I think even in hearing your story and how much it's going to pierce so many hearts, and people are going to be at this stage where they're like, what can I do? What can I do to have that moment that impacts me and makes me feel the kind of purpose Charla felt? It might not come in a big trip or a big, bold move. It could come in just that quiet whisper during a cup of tea.
Yeah. And I think you got to also think about the moments that come before and the moments that come after those big moments. Like when I started painting the backdrops for my kids' school plays, my kids weren't ever in the plays, and I was a known artist, and it just kind of seemed like, oh, I'm the artist, I have to go paint the backdrops, and I don't have time. I'm like spending every night of my life there, and it was insane. And I did it for 3 years, and every year I tried to make the process better, and every year I complained every minute I painted. And I'm like, why am I here? It seemed like it served zero purpose in my life. And yet I felt a massive, almost like magnetic pull to do it. Like this physical thing was pulling me in there. And I'm like, is this guilt, or is this like, what am I doing and why am I doing? I didn't understand it. But I never felt released from it in my spirit. So I did it. I kept doing it. Yeah. And that weird little uncomfortable, unenjoyable step. And even like on opening, the very first time I did the backdrops, I put my heart and soul in these backdrops, and the play happened and nobody talked about the backdrops. Nobody. Like that, there was no like satisfaction of, Charla, those backdrops are beautiful. Like my friend said that. Nobody else did. I'm like, all that work for nothing. I didn't even get any fame from it. Those stupid thoughts that you have. But that step forward into something I didn't enjoy and didn't understand, didn't see a purpose in, that prepared me to just physically paint that mural. I've not painted a mural since. It wasn't about backdrops or murals, but that was a step in preparation for. So as artists, I think that is just a step in trusting the next step in your journey that's going to lead you into a place like the prison moment. I literally call it the prison moment. It just sounds like something that didn't even happen to me, but the prison moment in my life. Yeah. I mean, I could talk about it in so many different metaphors and levels, but it's just taking that uncomfortable step. Yeah.
Charla, thank you for being willing to share with us. I know that it's something you hesitate even sharing with your friends and the world around you because it is so personal. So thank you for sharing on the Bold Artist podcast. And I'm not saying that lightly. I mean it. I feel that it's a story that has needed to be told because it is so special and personal and deeply influences who you are. And I know that the work you do in teaching other artists and influencing other artists to be the best that they can be, but also not just in art, but in their whole life and in their whole personhood. I feel like it's important for us to know where that began in you, or part of where it began in you. And so thank you for sharing it and letting us in.
Well, thank you for listening. If anybody made it to the end of the podcast, thank you for listening.
I know they'll be the ones.
There will be some. They will do it. And, you know, just to like finish the story in really quick, I painted the mural over the next 3 days, and Francine drove me to the prison the next day and left us at the gate. And we walked into the prison alone, and they shut the prison gates behind us. And we're like, we are locked inside a prison in Africa. Like, what are we doing? Are we crazy? Like, this is insane. We're like, okay, let's just go paint and hope.
Let's hope Francine can get back for
that
us.
Somebody comes back. Like, that's literally what happened. We stayed there the whole day, and we painted in the African sun, and our backs got completely and utterly burnt to a crisp because we didn't, there was nowhere else to go. Like, we didn't even use the bathroom. Like, I don't know who to ask to go to the bathroom. And we talked to the prison guards, and the moms would hang out, and the kids would come and play with us. And I remember I sat at the water cooler just to get some shade and to take a break for a minute with all the ladies sitting there. I just went and sat, and this lady offered me her food. Like, she's like, are you hungry? And she offered, and the food looked really good, actually. It was like kale and rice, which they ate every day, all day. But I was like, that looks good.
Kale and rice.
Yeah, I'm like, I am not going to eat your food, thank you, but I am not going to take food from you. You know, like there's a lot of moments in there. So for 3 days we painted in those conditions, and we completed the mural, and so we have some photos of it that we'll put up and share. And we walked out of there 3 days later, just completely changed people at other levels, you know, like different levels that you would expect from that experience. But we did do it, and it was pretty cool. We hung out in the prison, and they let us go at the end of it. And they let us take photos of it too, which they told us we weren't going to be allowed to take photos, but they did let us take some photos. So yeah, that's a whole other story in itself, but that was a lot of fun. And I thought some people will be wondering what happened after I cried for 8 hours. Yeah. So we did it.
Well, and you made it through the podcast without like a lot of tears. Like,
I have learned you're
looking pretty good.
You stay up here. You don't let yourself sink into that emotion. Yeah, it's hard to do.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Bold Artist podcast and listening to this amazing, profound story of Charla Maarschalk and her prison moment. And if you haven't heard last week's episode where she shares about the Kenya girl, make sure to catch that one as well, because it gives us the fullest, most full circle story to hear both of these podcasts together. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And until next time, keep creating.
Thank you, everybody. And we're going to call this, I think, I went to prison for 3 days. That's what we're going to call this podcast.
Okay. Okay.